when we look at Stuff Plus and Pitching Bot and all the different run prevention models to date, they're great tools. They have pushed things forward. They've found different traits you can bring about pitchers. But the way that these models are trained is biased towards volume of data, volume of entry points. So if you have entry points to these models that don't include guys like Assad, well, then the model is going to bias against those pitchers who have more similarities among everyone. With Assad, his stuff is going to grade as a 40 out of 80 on the scale, which is one standard deviation below league average. His slider is going to grade as bad by all intents and purposes. But the way those models are working is they're assuming Assad looks like a normal pitcher, but he doesn't.
All right, today we have a special guest on. I've known this person for 20-something years at least.
Long time.
A long time. He is an addicted, I think that's the word to use for this, addicted Cubs fan. He is unbelievably addicted to them. And growing up, we went to elementary school together. This was before the Cubs won the World Series in 2016.
That's right. They did win the World Series, by the way, in 2016. Just pointing that out.
Oh my gosh. Before that, though, me and some other people would chant 1908 and sing a song for you. And you had some tough times growing up with being a Cubs fan. And of course, being in Arizona, the Diamondbacks won the World Series when we were, 9 years old. So, of course, all the local kids suddenly became Diamondback fans when that happened.
It taught me mental fortitude, Jared. All right. That's what I'll say about that. Wasn't a good time when it was going on, but it taught me toughness.
That's right.
Let's say that.
That's right. Now you're on the other side. They won a World Series and now you can die happy.
That's right. And, it's weird seeing you and I do this because we grew up playing baseball together. I've seen your success as a pitching coach over the years. And who would have thought, 20 years ago, us two idiots, elementary school, getting in trouble doing this.
Yep, no doubt. Couldn't have asked for a better situation. It's been great. But I'm going to give you a formal intro. So I don't even know if I said your name yet. Brendan Miller is who our special guest is.
I can't even say my name properly. I have problems saying R's with my name. So thank you.
So when the description I'm about to give then might be misleading then for your credentials. So, and I literally, like I said, I've known Brendan for a long time, and I had to ask him last night, okay, give me your exact degree, your titles, all this fancy stuff, because Brendan's done a lot from an academic standpoint and what he's doing currently in life. But so he went to school, has a PhD in neuroscience. He is a neuroscience researcher living in the beautiful San Diego, California. From a baseball standpoint, has experience developing machine learning software and making baseball computer tools. And we'll dive into some of those. He has a pretty cool tool that he has developed and is using to evaluate pitchers right now, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, I mentioned he's an avid Cubs fan. He actually, part-time on the side does a podcast with one of his buddies on the Cubs. They talk every week and break them down. I love listening to him and getting him excited, or hearing him get excited or upset about what the Cubs are doing, which is usually depressed these days with the Cubs.
These days, yeah.
But yeah, and then also, you're also part-time with Pitching Coach U. You help me with visuals and some of the analytics and help me with some of the visuals that you guys see that I post online sometimes and all that. So a lot of great stuff that Brendan is able to do. And what we're going to do today is a little bit different. We're going to talk about the Cubs because I wanted to gear it towards what Brendan studies a lot and does a lot of, while also leading into more of the pitching side and, me talking more about maybe some of the specifics of mechanics, what I'm seeing from a pitch movement standpoint, maybe what they could add to their arsenal. And Brendan will give a lot of analytical insight and what he sees watching the Cubs day in and day out. So the plan is going to be to dive into 3 pitchers. We're going to start with the first one and just jump right in with Justin Steele, who is the ace of the Chicago Cubs. If you're not familiar with him, you'll probably hear about him soon because he has been pretty dominant, I would say, this year. He started off the year with an injury, I think opening day, right? Had that hamstring injury on baseball.
Going to first base, tumbled over, almost ruined my entire life. I thought he was out for the entire year, but, he recovered.
You're usually a little dramatic with injuries. So that's
a little bit. It's a thing.
Yeah, but Justin Steele, he's unique because, well, number one, he's the ace, so we want to talk about him for that reason. But he also has some unique characteristics. Has a lot
Yeah.
of cut on his fastball, and he's left-handed. And I feel like with lefties, especially, you don't typically see their primary fastball being a cutter. Essentially, usually, they're more of a sinker guy if they have more of a non-traditional four seam. The cut aspect, I would say, is pretty unique for lefty starter specifically. But let's just jump in. Like, what stands out to you about Justin?
Unorthodox trajectory, number one. I think it speaks to what you do as a pitching coach. And I've always had questions for pitching coaches like yourself. How do you find unique traits? And how do you go about balancing something that you want a pitcher to adopt while also ensuring that it's not too risk heavy, right? You want someone to develop and succeed, but you don't want to completely ruin the guy's entire repertoire by taking this extreme risk. With Justin Steele, he was a different pitcher prior to 2022. He was throwing a sinker once every 4 pitches at the tail end of September. Now he has, as you point out, that cut right fastball, and he implemented that as more of his dominant pitch type, even though he had it in his basket. But really, he implemented that as his dominant pitch type in June of 2022, and he took off ever since then. And around that same time, although he did have some of that natural cut right profile, it actually geared towards a little bit more of a cut right
Mm-hmm.
profile. And since then, he's taken off and he's become principally a 2 pitch guy. But this was someone who was experimenting with a curveball, a sinker, a changeup, and a four seamer just 1 year prior to becoming an exclusive almost 2 pitch guy.
Yeah, I think this is a good lesson, like from a pitching development standpoint, of really leaning into what a pitcher does well. And what Justin does well is he is unbelievable at supinating and cutting the baseball. So that's why he naturally can cut the fastball. He gets a ton of sweep on his sweeper and can throw that really well. Typically, arm side pitches are going to be a little bit more difficult. Now, this was prior to us understanding seam shifted wake and how we can still utilize the seams to get arm side movement despite having lower efficiency. But at the end of the day, like, you got to focus on what they do really well at first before going down those rabbit holes. And for him, he already naturally cut the fastball. So like in 2021, despite it being still about 4 inches of arm side movement, it was like a 71% spin efficiency fastball, which is well below league average. League average is around 90% for fastballs. So he already naturally cut it. And then I'm assuming the Cubs did a little bit of additional work on maybe adjusting the grip, maybe a cue. I think we saw his arm slot when we were talking about this last night. His arm slot has risen a couple inches since that year. So it's really like seeing the potential in a pitch and seeing the ability that he has and really leaning into it and making it something super unique, which is now, 13 to 15 inches of induced vertical break, right around that zero line of horizontal on average. And he's really leaned into it. So, now his spin efficiency, I think, is like 66%. So he's cutting it slightly more. Release height is a little bit higher. So now he's able to get behind the ball more. And now he's able to get, 30 minutes, I think, to 45 minutes of seam effect, which is allowing it to get that late cut with that ride as well.
Here is a question. He's someone who's older for having success. He was going through a bullpen stint, getting roles on a weak Cubs team out of the starting rotation. It's kind of a stupid question, but people do wonder, why did it take them so long to figure this out? Like it's not to critique the Cubs or those involved. They got it right, and he's become one of the more successful pitchers they've ever developed. But with your experience, is it because they were worried about taking risk and, to your point, elevating that release point a little bit? Why would it take someone so long to find those unique traits? Is it just randomness?
I can't speak on the Cubs' behalf, so I don't know what their process is for developing pitchers. And like, was Steele a high prospect? Like, how high in the draft did he go?
He had Tommy John when they drafted him.
Okay.
So basically, they drafted him. He recovered from Tommy John. I believe he was an overslot. So they drafted him, gave him more money, let him rehab. So he was always considered a top prospect, but he was never in the light of someone like Kate Horton, their current top
Yeah.
prospect, and the guys that you see these days.
And when did he get drafted? Like 18, 19?
Man, he's 29 now, so it must have been 7 years ago. So like 2017 or so, somewhere in that time
Okay.
period. Yeah.
Well, I would say like if he were to get drafted, now or even a year or two ago, I bet the development process would have been a lot faster with trying things.
Yeah.
I would say even around 2017. And then once again, I can't speak on the Cubs' behalf. I don't know what they do and how forward they are with, or how aggressive they are with some of this stuff. But then there's still a lot of unknowns, right? Like pitch movement, at the highest level, big leagues, they were definitely looking at that stuff. But I don't know how much at the minor league level, like that was necessarily taken into account for. And especially him being someone coming off of an injury, they drafted injured. Typically, you're going to be a little more conservative with those guys. You're not going to make crazy changes immediately after an injury. So it's probably one of those things like, hey, let's just get him healthy. Let's see how he performs. And we'll let the game tell us if we need to make an adjustment. And how was he coming up in the system? Once again, I don't have a background really on him. Like, did he dominate coming up or did he have some rough patches in the minors?
Has some command issues. And I think he was trying to find his groove.
Yeah.
COVID hit in 2020. So you had that gap.
Yep.
They had this offsite in Mesa developmental program during COVID. So he was experimenting with different things there. This is speaking generally, but he's someone who didn't find the groove until 2022. And
Yeah.
for a while, I thought he would be that two-seamer guy just because he finished 2021 using that pitch more than his other pitches. So I was shocked to see him not use that and just go do like a four-seam a slider profile, and he's taken off.
Oh, the pitch is dominated. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, the fastball right now this year, I mean, it's got a 312 expected WOBA.
Last year is the most run effective fastball in Major League Baseball. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, 312 isn't bad either. Anyway, for a four-seam fastball, I mean, that's above average. I don't know what average is off the top of my head, but I want to say it's closer to like 340 for expected WOBA. And he just pounds the zone. I mean, he has a 64% in zone rate with the fastball. He's throwing it for a strike 74% of the time. Like it's just here it is, try and hit it. And then he sets up the sweeper and some of his other offerings with it. But what was interesting is we talked about this last night. He might be able to benefit from some location changes, specifically to lefties. Because if you look at how he's pitched, he is dominating. Like I would say he's borderline dominating. The only reason I would say he's not fully like the most dominant starter in baseball is because he doesn't quite strike out enough guys to be in that caliber.
Be in that reliably 2, 3, 4-year projection window. He needs to get more strikeouts. It's always been one of the questions we've had with him.
Yeah. And so he's a strike thrower. He pounds the zone. His fastball is kind of unique. He doesn't throw super hard. He's averaging like 91.5 or 91.6 now. Has the good sweeper, but he was missing more bats with his fastball a couple years ago, despite not having it cut as much as it is now. And what we noticed when we were looking last night was it was specifically against the lefties. He was living up and in more with the fastball as opposed to now he's going more down and away. He had a 45% miss rate on the fastball against lefties 2 years ago. Now it's like 20%, which is league average. So now that he has such an ability to pound the zone, like he obviously can throw a strike like it's nothing now he probably needs to take that next level and get a little more precise. Because if you look at his heat maps for his fastballs, I mean, it's pretty middle. There's not a lot of precise location, at least it appears that he's trying to go to with that pitch. It's kind of just here it is. I'm going to let it naturally cut and see what happens and just pound the zone with it. So he might be needing to take that next step with locating it in more specific quadrants of the zone, just especially since he's not throwing, 95 plus.
The idea with Steele against lefties was to start using more of his sinker. And that way he can go up and in to lefties rather than using that four-seam fastball. To your point, you don't typically see him get those whiffs that you saw in 2021 when he had those command issues and when he was experimenting with a different breaking pitch and more sinkers. From your perspective, again, you're not with the Cubs. It's always like unfair to ask you because you don't have all the information at hand.
Yeah.
But if you were to look at him on just a piece of paper, would you say, okay, you have the four-seam fastball or you have the sinker from day one, not even meeting the guy and talking to him? Would you first think that the sinker or four-seam is priority target number one to throw against lefties? Which one would you pick?
Oh, just against lefties?
Just against lefties.
Oh, that's tough. Probably the sinker because sinkers perform so well left on left.
Yeah.
And he's proven that. I mean, I don't have the numbers exactly against lefties, but his sinker is working. Like he's getting a 70, what do I have to write down? 73% ground ball rate on the sinker. That's incredible, right? So, but it doesn't necessarily solve the strikeout issue because sinkers aren't going to be a strikeout pitch for him. Now it might set up the sweeper more, and now he throws that sinker in on the hands maybe earlier in the count, and now the sweeper is going to play better off of it. But I don't think the sinker alone is necessarily going to help him increase his strikeouts, but that doesn't mean he can't still perform really well with it like he has.
What's the best way for him to increase strikeouts? Different pitch types going forward?
Throw harder.
Listen, man, you got to be realistic over here.
He's throwing 91. I mean, he's throwing 91.
That is a sacrifice. But that's a sacrifice with generating more cut. That's an intentional sacrifice, you would think, right?
Maybe. Well, if that's the case, I'll tell you what, I would probably go back to his 2022 fastball or 2021, whatever year it was.
Well, now you're going to cause some controversy over here because that's been his bread and butter, that cut right profile. Can I show a graph over here? Let me show you what I mean by this. Okay.
Please.
So I got to figure out how to do this presenting thing, which I got it right here. We're going to figure this out on the fly. Okay. I should do this on my own show, actually. I think people will
you use StreamYard, don't you?
I do. So 1 second here. I got to show. Can I show my entire screen?
Yep. Click present at the bottom.
Got it. Okay. All right. Do you see this?
Nope.
You do not see this.
I can't see it. Let me see if I have to change my settings.
Well, you got to show it on it. Oh, there we go. I got it.
Yeah, there it is. I have to share it to the screen.
Yeah.
Here we are.
All right. You see this?
Yep.
So, okay.
Well, first, tell us about, because this is something that you created. This is one of those tools I was talking about in your intro.
The question I always have when I don't know a pitcher, I'm not familiar with his stuff, is I want to find a comparison. I want to find a ruler. I want to find who does he look like. And the tool that I wanted to make to do this borrows from what's called a data reduction technique. And there's limitations to this, but the general idea is to take every StatCast metric, vertical approach angle, spin rate, release points, movement, yada, yada, everything that you can get from just scraping StatCast data, and you compress it and you find all the different correlative numbers, and then you just shrink it down into two variables. That's basically it. You compress everything and you shrink it down into two variables. That way you can display it on a screen. And I'm going to get in trouble saying this because there's some very opinionated data reduction folks out there, but the distance among the points generally reflect similarities of guys. Now, if you look at the screen right here, you have all these different black spheres. This represents one pitcher. And don't worry about the x-axis or the y-axis. It's just look at all the black spheres. Those are one pitcher's fastballs, a left-handed pitcher's fastball. Justin Steele is highlighted in red in the top left. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that he's away from the center of the black dots. That means he's dissimilar from most pitchers, number one. That means his four-seam fastball is unique, meaning batters don't see his shape of fastball. There's not many comparisons. If you look at who he looks like the most, one guy on this list is Max Fried from Atlanta, but he doesn't generate the same amount of cuts as Steele does, or rather, there's amount of ride that Steele does. He has some cut on that pitch, actually more cut on that pitch. And really what this shows is that Steele's four-seam fastball is dissimilar, but within the tiers of guys who've had success, but dissimilar enough where really no one has had that type of pitch thrown in the league before. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm always wondering when I look at these graphs and these charts of how much do you want to tinker? Because like we talk about, we need to improve like whiff rates. We need to improve, long-term success, but we're assuming that the way he goes about his business now is similar to how pitchers tend to have success. And because he's so dissimilar, in my mind, you can't really say with high confidence that things need to be changed because he is in a league of his own. So I would be more inclined just to see how it plays out, his current repertoire, and then you subtly adjust things as you go.
Yeah, I mean, and truthfully, like looking back at his fastball a few years ago when he had a higher whiff rate, I was just looking at it, was a 29% miss rate on the fastball, which is elite. Like average is around 2021, which is exactly where he's at now. And his movement, I think, was like 15 VB, 4 HB. So 4 inches
Yeah.
of arm side run, which is still relative cut to what's
Relative cut.
average.
Now it's like almost a 0.
Right. Now it's a 0 with a little bit less VB at like 13-ish. But like
13.
if you take the velocity out of it, I would say his fastball now, the shape of it is
It's like
better.
yeah.
But he averaged over 93 in 2021. So I'm wondering if the reason he had higher whiffs then is purely because he had a little bit more velo and his locations were slightly different.
Yeah. And that's a question that you would have to take some risk trying to address,
Yep.
right? And again, we talk about velo. Velo is so important. Velo directly correlates to more whiffs, better run production. But again, velo is interpreted in the context of the entire shape being within like a normal distribution of pitchers, right? So if you had Steele's shape currently with 2 more miles per hour velocity, undeniably that's a better pitch. But if you have Steele's 93-mile-per-hour fastball with less relative cut and a less ability to command, then do you want to risk that to gain more velocity, or do you want to keep it as is with that unique pitch shape, you know?
I agree. If it was me right now, I think the number one thing I would do is like, let's start to get a little more precise with your locations because you
So
can throw strikes. Let's
for
now
sure.
start to go to different quadrants
So,
of the
you
zone.
know, it's interesting too, because like, and we were talking about this for a couple years, but Steele, he just attacks you. And he has a general, he talks about this. He has a general idea of what he wants to do. And if he gets beat, then the batter beat him. But one of the reasons for his success, he said, was because his misses became competitive. If he went up and in to right-handed batters and missed up and away, he was still able to get those swings and misses or weak contact. Whereas his misses in 2021, which were plenty with that high walk rate, those misses tended to result in more damage in the form of more base runners, more stress, or more hard contact when he did not command well. So it's one of those weird instances where I'm wondering, does it make sense for him just to keep going as is and just generally hitting an area, or trying to be more precise? What typically do you tell your pitchers?
Typically we start off broad. It's like, let's just prove that we can throw strikes, right? Like we're aiming middle. We're going to let the ball move where it wants to go. Like with Steele, his ball is going to naturally cut glove side a little bit, throw it middle. But once you are throwing enough strikes, like Kevin Gausman falls in the same bucket.
I love
Gausman,
Kevin Gausman.
I do too, but he throws too many fastballs right down the middle, or at least he did. I haven't looked at it this year. I know he has in the past, and he's always one of the highest in zone percentage guys with the fastballs in the mid 60s, just like Justin Steele. So I understand it because especially for Gausman, I mean, he's using that fastball mainly to set up his splitter. Like his split is his primary pitch. Steele, his sweeper. I mean, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think that's probably his best pitch. I mean, it's his main off-speed pitch.
It's his only other pitch.
So I'm going to share my screen. Let's just look at the locations real quick, and let's see what would be the right path. But to answer your question, what I typically do is start off more broad, and then we get a little bit more narrow. So we might start off like just prove that you can throw it in the strike zone. Once you can prove you can throw in the strike zone, now we can move to halves of the plate. So if you're more of a ride guy, maybe we're thinking top of the zone. If you're a sinker guy, just bottom of the zone. And then if we need to get more specific with, in and out, then we can. But I would say that's a few steps away. But for someone like Steele, he's probably ready for that. Can you see my screen?
I can see it right here. I see a lot of colors. We got the storm coming over here in the strike zone.
Sure do. So this is just fastball location. So where it's the most red, that's where he's throwing it the most frequently. Right-handed batters here on the left-handed batters here on the right.
Yep.
So against righties, I mean, on average, it's pretty much middle up, I would say, is where he's throwing it. Lefties, pretty much middle, sometimes middle away, but for the most part, middle.
Yeah.
So let's start. And you might, coming back to people that are more analytically inclined, they might say that this isn't the best way to look at this, but I'm going to look at his expected WOBA heat map. And I understand that this might not be the best way to look at how his pitches are performing by location, but it will at least give us a general sense, at least in my opinion.
You're going to piss off all the nerds.
Yep. Okay. So here we go. So just for those that don't know, blue is good for the pitcher. The more green and red it gets, the better it is for the batter. So we can see right off the bat, in on the hands, inside half is going to perform really well. Really, bottom of the zone's fine. Top of the zone's fine. Basically, where he's throwing is the only place not to throw it, probably. for the most part, I would say. Like it seems pretty clear if he throws this where it naturally wants to move, which is inside, is going to be pretty beneficial for him. Let's look at lefties. Lefties pretty much anywhere. So just throw it down the middle.
Lob it over the middle of the plate.
Keep doing what you're doing. Throw it down the middle. Like you said, probably using that sinker more now to lefties, or he potentially could use that sinker more. It could use the cutter off of that and then the sweeper to finish them. Yeah. Mainly, it looks like righties would be the main location thing to concern himself with. So let's see. Let's go back to pitch frequency so we can see. So I guess there are some of you that are just listening to this. So I'll try to describe it a little bit more. Fastball, he's located basically middle up, sometimes inside. It's performing its best when he is going basically belt high in or bottom of the zone or top of the zone. Essentially just middle across the plate is not his best place. What do you got on that? Correct me if I'm wrong on any of that or what you're seeing.
It aligns with the eye test. The redness that you see in the top left of the zone towards like middle up, those are misses.
Right. So he's not trying to go there.
He's not, but he's getting still enough weak contacts. Like you see the miss rate right there. Look at that. See that miss rate?
So when he goes up and away, that's where he gets his misses.
Yeah. And so again, those are not intended most of the time. Sometimes maybe, but he explicitly says those are misses. So that is one reason why he's had success, because again, if you just substitute out those success whiffs from 2021, what happened in 2021 were those misses generated damage. So that's in part why he's having success. I don't know.
Well, okay, yes, because this is important to realize, right? Like when he throws it up and away, he gets his misses, but like you said, it's not intentional. And it kind of comes to, this is kind of different, but same messages with sinkers. When you throw a front hip sinker or a glove side sinker, it performs extremely well, but the risk of it is really high. If I don't execute that and it floats screwed over the middle, it's going to get launched. So I'm wondering if it's kind of a similar idea with his cutter.
Yeah.
If he intentionally is trying to go up and away, the margin for error is fairly small to where if it ends up just cutting right down the middle, now it's right in the barrel and they're able to hit it.
I've heard different folks who have been involved in, organizations or data analysis, talk about command, and even the principle of command. These are all from the nerds, not, the coaches and the jocks like you guys said. Which, by the way, I don't think I'm a nerd. I'd be, you saw me. I have some athleticism.
Yeah, I didn't mention that. Brendan was my second baseman behind me in high school when I was pitching, made great plays for me, turned double plays.
I just had a bad arm. I had a great glove. I had a bad arm. That's okay. That's okay. But there's a principle of like this command like exists, and can you actually like fine tune with a lot of precision, hit your spot over and over and over again? Or are you more inclined to take like, from what I've heard, the Rays philosophy, where you just hammer the zone, you just aim middle in like every single pitch, and wherever the pitch goes, it goes. And Darvish talked about this when he was with the Cubs before going to San Diego. One of the reasons for his success after a rough start to his Cubs career was he kind of just took an approach as if I'm going to throw it down the middle and just let the pitch move and let my stuff take over. And so I bring this up because from a neurological perspective, I think there's some value of just always trying to hit the same spot over and over and over and over again, and not even deviating. And if that's down the middle, you just do that. The reason I think that is because your brain is naturally going to calibrate that. So let's give your brain the highest volume and the most opportunities for it to naturally calibrate. For me, like, how I am when I play baseball, I was always in my mind. Like that. That's why I was not a good baseball player. I was always in my mind trying to focus on my mechanics. I talk and I listen to like Josh talk about the yips, right? I think that also the best way to decrease the chances of the yips is just to have your brain default state take over. So my thinking would be, all right, give your brain the most chances to naturally calibrate and just hit one spot over and over and over again. And that's down the middle. So be it.
The issue is if you actually get good at that, throwing it middle in the big leagues isn't going to work.
Well, not trying to like actually throw middle, but you just take one spot and you only hit that spot. You don't go and maybe some guys like Kyle Hendricks can do this with success, but you don't always try to mix and match all throughout the zone.
I agree with that. Like, I would say for the most part, at least, when I was studying a lot of guys that I loved watching pitch, like, Greg Maddux is kind of a bad example. Well, maybe not. Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, some of these other guys, when I first started getting introduced to Brooks Baseball, where I could actually look at locations of pitches and some of these other websites, for the most part, these best pitchers, they had one location for each pitch type. So if it was a slider, it was down to the glove side, down and into a righty, down and in. If it was a sinker, they were going down and away, whatever it was. Each pitch at least had a specific area they were trying to go. Maybe every once in a while they deviated from it, but it was probably an accident most of the time.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I totally agree. There should be probably a little bit more consistency. And I see that in amateur baseball. In the minor leagues, I saw it to where guys think they're better than they are at commanding the baseball. They think that one pitch they can throw a glove side sinker, and then the next one they can throw it down and away.
How often do you see that?
Oh, I would say it's getting better, I'd say. But I would say when I first got into pro ball and in amateurs, I would say 8 out of 10 players think that.
Why was that happening, you think? Just like they're growing up in high school? Or
I think it's just, I think growing up, you're told, you need to be able to hit spots, you need to be able to change speeds, be able to go in and out and all this. Well, that was different.
Well, I'm a little bit different over here. But I will say for people who don't know, I'm going to give you your flowers. You had a 20 strikeout game. You talk about me like
That's
helping
true.
you out defensively. I didn't do a thing behind you on that.
That game you didn't have to. And for those that are asking, it wasn't the deaf and blind school. It was actually a team that I think went to the state championship that year, because unfortunately we didn't. But anyways,
that's right.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I do. Now, I will say a lot of organizations are having the philosophy of just throw it down the middle and let the pitch go where it wants to go, because most of the time you're not going to end up throwing it down the middle.
And I'm not saying that, right? I'm not saying, just throw it down the middle. I'm saying pick a spot and let your brain take over and not think about it. Don't give yourself the yips.
No, I agree. Okay, that was a lot about Justin Steele. We didn't even get into his sinker or his changeup. I'll just give you some cliff notes. I think his changeup, if I just look at the movement plot, I would say it could probably be improved. But then I look at the results and it's great. It's weak contact. He's getting really, really good results with it.
He needs more confidence with it.
He's got to throw it more. You throw it more, you're going to get more confidence. The results so far have been great. So with that in mind, I wouldn't touch it until it needs to be touched, right? Like if it's performing well and the movement's good enough, it's good enough, especially off of his four-seam fastball. Like it has depth and arm side run relative to his fastball. It's getting good results. Let it be. If a bigger sample size tells you that it's not working, then you make an adjustment.
Can guys like Steele, who supinates a lot, can they have successful changeups? I mean,
100%.
How would that happen?
So he would have to utilize seam shifted wake, which I've talked about a few times on this show, but essentially he needs to be able to orient the seams correctly to where the ball is able to move differently than what's expected and to allow it to actually catch and move arm side and down more than what would be expected, purely based off of the way the ball's spinning.
Is that a grip change or a mechanical change?
Mechanical change he doesn't need to make because he already naturally cuts the ball. It'd be more of a grip of orienting it correctly. So it needs to be either like a 2-seam or a 1-seam variation. 4 seams typically are going to be more symmetrical with the way they spin. So you're not going to get as much seam effects on those pitches, at least to the arm side. It might actually cut like his 4-seam does if he has like more of a 4-seam changeup.
Principally, a grip change is going to allow him to do that and getting comfortable with that grip change. Got it.
And honestly, I was looking at it last night. Let me just pull it up real quick. His changeup, the spin efficiency, I think is like perfect on it. I don't have it in front of me, but it's like 70 something percent, which honestly, all the ones that are like 0 or negative vertical break, they're around that 70% range a lot of times, or even less. So he just needs to get the seams oriented correctly to get more depth. But he also has a lot of backspin because he has such a high slot. Like you need lower efficiency, but you also need the access to be a little bit lower to where there's more side spin on the ball. And he's just not able to probably do that as well. So he might even be a guy that benefits from a splitter where the splitter can kind of kick the axis sideways.
That would be sick. Now you're talking like, in La La Land over here. And
he could throw a split. I actually, if he wants it, he can send me a message. I got a couple grips for him.
All right. So Justin Steele, if you want to DM us over here, we got your splitter over here.
We got you a splitter. Yeah. Cause he gets a lot of seam effects. He's getting like an hour of seam effects. Average on changeups is about 45 minutes of deviation. Yeah. He's getting close to an hour. It's just out of the hand. It's like 11 something. So it's only dropping down to 10 something.
Let me ask you a question, and maybe I can pull this plot up. You thought we would get out of here in 45 minutes. You
Yeah,
thought
we're
wrong
33 minutes in on one pitcher.
This will be the last thing, and then we'll move on. I don't want to take too much time on Steele. So let me show this screen. I gotta make sure I have my notifications over here. I got my mom texting me.
You got to mute your notifications
about crock pot recipes. Okay,
can't hate that.
Can't hate that. You see this? So
Yep.
okay. So what you're looking at on the left are all of his fastballs. What you're looking at on the right are all of his sliders or sweepers. Now, this is not movement profile. This is that data compression technique I was talking about. So every single StatCast number you throw in, and then you see those arrows. Those arrows are telling you why pitches are moving in a certain direction. Okay, so more pitches on the bottom left means release extension is causing those pitches to appear in that population. They're also color coded by start. So blue spheres are his early season starts, red are his most recent. If you look now at the red fastballs, you're seeing it deviate towards being influenced by more release points, like release point X, Y, and Z. And it's also affecting how his pitches are accelerating vertically. And interestingly, when you take all that information and then you ask the question, well, is that influencing how hard his pitches are getting hit? The answer is yes. So the question I have for you is, over his last few starts here, why would his release point be trending differently? What would be changing that release point? And would that be a concern? Is it fatigue? Is it just randomness that you typically see? Should we be concerned about that, etc.?
How much is it changing? Sorry, or in what direction is it changing? Is it going up or down?
This is the thing with we have to look into the fine specifics, right? So this is where the data compression is not going to give the direction. All we know is the whole cake, the release point horizontally in space and vertically is changing, and that's influencing his vertical acceleration. So you would take this signature and then you would go into the fine specifics and start to ask a question, all right, what actually is changing here? And that's like where I call this like the pitch alert tool, because it will tell you what is deviating from the norm. And you don't have to go one by one in each metric. You just get it within 30 seconds, and it will tell you, okay, within the last few weeks, your release point's different. So then it starts to prompting the questions of what's going on, essentially, for more finer details.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again because I just want to look at. I have to see what his numbers are actually doing.
Okay.
And his release height is changing a lot.
Okay. So there you go. Is it higher or lower?
Last start it was lower. So
why would that be happening?
I don't know. I really don't know. There's so many variables.
So his release point's lower. What about his horizontal? Is that different as well?
Let me look at this. So there's a lot going on here, guys. Sorry for those of you that are looking. So
they love this.
Release Z is in inches, his release height. So let's just go back to, so his average for the season is 73.5. Okay. Right. So 6 feet, 1.5 inches.
Good math, Jared. Good job.
Yeah. I don't care what you say about me as a math student. So at its highest point recently in the last few starts, July 30th, it was 74.3 inches. His last outing was 72.5. Now, something else to consider here.
So is 2 inches significant? Like for real?
That's quite a bit. Yeah. Now, something to consider, though, is the mound. Now, maybe you can answer this for me. Are they measuring release height from the ground or from the rubber?
I think it's from the ground.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then the mound will play a massive role. So say he's in Cincinnati and the mound is a little bit lower.
Well, this all has to be standardized. I don't know the answer to that.
No. Oh, what's standardized? The mounds?
Well, all the data I download from like all my programs, it's not standardized. I have to standardize by the mound height.
Yeah, because every mound's different. That's the issue.
I don't have the mound heights for all these stadiums.
What you should do then is just compare it to home games, because home games, it should be basically the same.
Can you do that here?
Yeah, let's just filter home games. Can you still see my screen?
I can see your screen. I'm a little upset that they don't standardize by mound height. What the hell is that?
They should. Okay, so home games, he's averaging 73.6. Still, last game was at home, 72.5.
All right.
So he's still down an inch from his season average. But if you look back to early in the season, or sorry, when he came off the IL, he was at one game. I mean, June 1st, he was 74.7 inches.
Right. Where's the release X? That's
right next to it.
So he's also letting go further away from his shoulder. right?
Or is he standing on different parts of the rubber?
So then you have to look at the video. We don't have to do that now, but this is
Yeah.
what I mean, right? So you're getting this weird mix of change. And then that's probably influencing how the ball is moving, vertically and
Yes.
accelerating in your
Okay.
shades.
So this is interesting. This last game, at least compared to all the home games, it was his lowest release height, and he was the furthest over towards first base out of any game.
Yeah. I don't know what to think about that.
Let's see how that impacted his fastball shape.
Yeah. Well, it was a rainy day, by the way. So, it was horrible weather. He pitched 2 innings, but still,
Yeah.
this has been a trend. So horizontal is still -0.4. So it's still within the range of what you typically see. It's not like a huge outlier, right?
That's average for the season.
Oh, sorry. So
So
what was
he
he at?
was
-0.7. So still within the range
it was
of
the same, yeah.
normality.
Now
Yeah,
his vertical break was a little lower.
exactly. So the way is moving vertically is lower, right?
Yeah, just because he probably had a little bit more side spin on the ball.
So
Yeah,
so
he did.
again, so when I see this, Jared, like this
Yeah,
is not something he's shown at all during the season. So
right.
when I see that pop up, it makes me think what is going on if I should be concerned. Is
Yep.
that something that's just mechanically needs to be tweaked, or is it potentially a sign of what I'm going with this, maybe like injury or some
Yeah.
underlying thing?
It's impossible for me to know without being on the inside. Like, it could be they're trying to make mechanical changes. Maybe he's trying to do
I
something
know
to a
you're not gonna know,
pitch.
but, like, in your experience, when you see a release point change like that, what would be your intuition? I'm not asking you to, like, project and diagnose Steele over here. I'm just wondering what you've seen in your experience.
If it's not injury related, it's usually because you're trying to create a different type of movement on a pitch or improve movement in a certain way. So you end up compensating in some way to cheat it in a way to create that movement. So I'm not saying
Yep,
that's what
yep.
he's doing, but a lot of guys with younger players, minor leaguers, amateurs, say we're trying to kill the depth on their changeup, they might naturally drop their slot a little bit to create more drop on the pitch. So
Well,
I
you're
would say with
making me a
him, that's
little
probably not it. But
you're making me a little concerned, I'm not gonna lie. Like like, you don't typically see release point changes that much,
well,
right?
his velo's been about the same though, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, but,
And he's still commanding the ball, right?
nah.
Oh, he's not?
He's had results in the past few weeks, but the command hasn't been as sharp. Like,
Okay.
visually looking at it, he's missing more up and away to right-handed batters.
Yeah.
That's just my 2 cents. I don't know if that's actually happening, but it's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I know it's not the answer you want. It's just I literally couldn't say.
I
It could
know.
be a million things. Yeah, it could be
Yeah.
injury related, it could be fatigue related. It could have been that day, like you said, it was a rainy day, something was off. Maybe he had to stand on a different part of the rubber
It's
because it was
been
all
the
chewed
last
up.
3, 4
Okay.
weeks we're
Okay.
seeing that.
Okay. Okay.
It's kinda scaring me over here. You guys need to get a tool to figure this out. I'm serious about this.
Yeah.
All these pitcher
Yeah.
injuries, you have no tool to figure out fatigue in games. It's ridiculous.
Yep. No, I agree. Okay. That's enough of
Anyway,
Mr. Justin Steele. Let's go on to the right-handed version of him,
AE.
Porter Hodge, who I'm sorry, Porter, I had not heard of you until Brendan told me about you. I haven't been doing my due diligence on Cubs relievers this year,
That's
but
fine.
I like
I
your
got
stuff, Porter. You got
merry-go-round.
good stuff. He's interesting, right? Like I would call him a harder throwing right-handed version of Justin Steele in a way. He has
That's what they've said.
cut ride four-seamer. He has a good sweeper. Like he has good stuff. I would say as a reliever, like he's pretty dialed in. What's your assessment?
Yeah, that was always the, comparison when he was first called up. A hard version, more extreme version of Justin Steele. Has the heaviest cut run profile in professional baseball for a right-handed pitcher. And so if you look at that same plot I was showing with Steele, with him being an outlier, Hodge is even more of an outlier, way different from the rest. The big question with him was commands. He had a walk rate, going off my memory, around 5.5 to 6 batters per 9 innings in AAA. Gets called up. Now his walk rate is around 3 batters per 9 at the big league level. I was told by Tommy Ottavy and pitching coaches that it's rare to see immediate improvements in command and walk rate at the big league level. So I'm inclined to think how they were able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually pretty good. Like, I mean, his walk rate is, I mean, I look at percentages, so I guess this would equate
Yeah.
to around that 3 mark, but 10.7% average in the big leagues is about 8.3%. I imagine relievers, it's a little bit higher. It's probably closer to 9 as average. So 10.7, yeah, it sounds like that's fairly high, but he's also striking out 30% of batters, which is pretty absurd.
Yeah.
So like I would take that. I'll take that ratio. 30% strikeouts with 10% walks. Like that will work, especially as a relief pitcher.
How will he become the Cubs closer? What does he need to do?
Oof.
What would you
Probably,
like to see him
probably
do?
just throw a few more strikes. I mean, I would say to be like a dominant starter, like he needs to be in single
Does
digits
he
probably
have
for
any
that walk
issues
rate.
against potentially left-handed batters? Is that cut right fastball sufficient against lefties? Does he need to develop a tighter breaking pitch because a sweeper may not work against lefties? What would you say?
Yeah, let's just share. Let's go down a little
Because like this was a problem with Adbert Alzolay. They have very different fastball shapes, but the issue with Alzolay, he had a heavy sweeper, and so he had to develop not a heavy sweeper. He had more of a sweepier slider, and he had to develop more of a north to south, harder slider to get
yeah.
beyond lefty issues. So I'm wondering if Hodge will need to do something similar, or he just uses that four seam fastball that has cut, and he just
Yeah.
changes the location.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, there's a lot of relievers or a lot of closers that dominated with just a cut ride fastball. I mean, the two famous ones would be Rivera and Kenley Jansen.
Do we even have any comparison of Rivera's stuff in terms of like number
Not
form?
not that I know of,
Yeah,
but
man, that pitch was nasty, man.
yeah, I mean, this is a small sample. I mean, he's only thrown 29 innings this year in the big league, so it's not that big of a sample. He's faced only 112 batters,
Still pretty big though,
but I mean, lefties, he's actually dominating more than righties.
Well,
By
there you go.
he's striking out 39% of lefties, 25% righties.
So how come his command is so much better all of a sudden? What's up with that? What do you? I mean, that seems so difficult to do. He just comes up and starts throwing
Yeah.
strikes more. Like I don't understand how all of a sudden that changed.
So it is interesting. Like I would not guess that as he gets called to the big leagues, he's suddenly going to be throwing more strikes. Like it's almost always the opposite. If there is a regression, they're going to throw
Yeah,
more balls because they're facing more disciplined hitters. Just the atmosphere is different. So sometimes players try to do more than what they typically do. It takes a little while to settle in. But I'm wondering if Porter, did he get off to a really good start? Like was his first couple outings really good?
it was never like really bad. He got options after his first, I don't know, 4 or 5 outings, but it wasn't because he was bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like roster crunches. So he got option, came back up, and basically immediately he was good. He may have had maybe 2 outings that were kind of suspect, but
Yep.
for the majority, the bulk results have been there for him.
And I think there's something to be said for that. Like, because his first couple outings were pretty solid, like you're able to build confidence now, right? So now I trust my stuff. I start to feel like I belong in the big leagues. I can get people out here and it kind of can just build on itself. So like, I think confidence is a big piece and it's tough to quantify, obviously. So that's, I don't want to say the annoying part of it, but you really can't quantify that. But there's no denying that piece is super important. And you look at it like his first 4 outings, he didn't walk anybody, right?
Yeah,
Struck out quite a bit of guys. First 4 outings were great. Then he went through that little lull you kind of talked about. Looks like
yeah.
in Chicago, Cincinnati, and against New York, like he walked a couple guys in an inning or 2 innings, all 3 of those outings, and then he started to figure it out again. But I think it's more of that. It just kind of snowballed on itself in a positive way to start the year. Saw good results, and now he's able to build on that. And I'm sure they're doing some strategies to help with it. Maybe it's targeting middle and throwing
Yeah.
more fastballs early. There's numerous ways or reasons why he's throwing more strikes, but I would say the confidence piece is something that probably should be valued a little bit more in this
Is it more
situation.
difficult to control cut right fastballs?
I mean, I didn't throw one, so I can't say for sure. Um, I don't know if that's true because I feel like most people that throw, that's their natural fastball, so it's
Mm.
normal for them, right? Like you
If
think of
you
Corbin Burns, another example.
Corbin Burns has ruined my life with Milwaukee for so many years. Yeah, I hope he stays in the American League. If you have a young pitcher, 17, 18, 19 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and he has natural supination, are
Yep,
you immediately trying to optimize that? Like, is there any risk
100%.
in, okay. So like if he has a profile that, again, he's 17, 18 years old, but if he has a profile that suggests it can be improved, is there any risk in trying to maximize that cut?
Well, see, we're talking about cut with the supination bias, but there's also people that because they supinate, say they have a slightly lower release or their wrist angle is able to kill the tilt or to get the tilt to be lower, they can use that cutting action to actually make the ball sink. So you first have to
Okay.
figure out which way do we want to lean into this? Do we want to lean into the cut profile or do we want to lean into the sink profile? You potentially can do both. But if we're talking about the primary fastball, we probably want to decide, okay, which one do we want to go with first? We're not
Well, you
going to
don't
do
want
both of
that
them at
to
the same time.
sink, right?
You don't
If
want
you
what to
want it,
sink.
if you had a primary four seam fastball, you wouldn't want that to sink,
Well, I'm
right?
saying you would change it to a sinker.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah, you would just change it to a sinker. Like let's just say, yeah, it was middle of the road movement, not a great pitch. Yeah, you got to decide: do we want to just turn this into a sinker, or do we want to try to make it actually cut more and optimize the four seam grip a little bit?
Do you think you'll see more heavier cut right profiles in the future, or is this just kind of how it is? And you know,
I think more people are just going to start leaning into what the pitcher's strengths are. So like, and I feel like a lot of players naturally supinate pretty well.
yeah,
So you're going to see, I honestly think that's why we're seeing a resurgence in sinkers, is because we went from everyone threw sinkers to sinkers are bad. No one's ever going to throw one against. And now they started to become
yeah.
valuable again. And truth be told, I think coaches are kind of having fun learning about seam shifted wake and being able to make the ball do different things. So we want to throw big shapes and nasty pitches like sinkers and depthy changeups and sweepers. So like, I would say everything comes and goes in waves. Like I think everything can work in the right place. Do I think cut ride is the end all be all? No, not for everybody, but for guys like Justin Steele, Tyler Glasnow, Corbin Burns, those people that naturally are able to do that, like, yeah, let's lean into it and let's not try to make it a clean spinning fastball that has true spin when that's just probably going to make it a dead average fastball.
With working with different pitchers, especially if they're not familiar with all the number stuff, it's pretty overwhelming. There's a lot of numbers like out
Yep.
there. Yeah. I put myself in the shoes. If I were a pitcher, 17, 18 years old, knowing who I am and knowing who you were at that age, you would dive into that so much. You would, I
Oh
know you would.
yeah.
You were 17, 18, you would try to maximize every single ounce, every single
I do
inch.
it. I do it now.
I know you still do it now. Is that dangerous to do without supervision? Like, I'm being serious about that because the injuries are up like crazy, dude. And even these guys who are experimenting that at the big league level or an organized ball, injuries are up like crazy. So, is there like a huge risk in all of what we're seeing?
Well, I would say the risk is trying to do something that maybe isn't natural for you to do personally, right? Like maybe you don't supinate well and you have a high slot and you're trying to throw a sweeper and you're trying to manipulate the ball in a way that isn't necessarily natural and you're changing your mechanics to achieve it. Yeah, maybe you're able to get the movement, but at the sacrifice of it affecting your arm and simply just not being natural for you to do personally. So I think it's just leaning into what the natural bias of the player is. And I would say, honestly, like I do think that a lot of people can throw a multitude of pitches. There's just different avenues to do it, right? Like changeups, there's so many ways to throw a changeup. You can throw a true four seam. If you're a great supinator, go Devin Williams style. Devin Williams is the king of pronating pitches. He literally, I would call his changeup a screwball. That is a screwball. That's not a changeup.
I hate that guy. I hate that guy so much.
So like, it's like, that's one way. Okay. You're a great pronator. Okay. Let's find a grip that allows you to really rip on the seams to create more of that pronation. Or are you a guy that supinates well? Okay. Let's get a two seam or a one seam variation to where we can get the seam effects to take it. Maybe you're a high slot guy and we have to go a split variation to get any sort of depth just because you get so much backspin on the ball. There's so many ways to achieve the movement you want. You just have to use the right strategy for that guy.
Which makes it fun, right? Because you're seeing 100%. Unorthodox development. One last question, and I do want to talk about Assad, but I value that you've been an organized ball, and even with the Twins, you work with so many different pitchers of different backgrounds and age groups. And it's not to suggest any one team is better than the other, but do you think there's a shrinking gap among organizations in terms of their pitching development infrastructure? Like, do you think that gap is shrinking now where maybe in 2018, and the Cubs were one of these teams, they were behind, according to their president, Jed Hoyer, and they caught up with Tommy Hotovy and Moskow's and Breslow's now with Boston. But from the outside, have looked at teams, and it seems to be like everything is shrinking, and that competitive edge or that market inefficiency, so to speak, is now shrinking, and these teams seem to be all catching up and speaking the same language across organizations.
I would say the gap is getting smaller as far as just the knowledge of what we potentially can do, right? Understanding pitch shapes a little bit better, using the tech more. But I will tell you, there's definitely still teams that are way behind. And one thing you have to consider, though, with this is maybe they're not
behind in resources or behind in communication
and implementation. So I would say across the board, like if you look at front offices, you look at even the PD departments that are at the top of them. Actually, even that, I take that back. Actually, not all PD departments.
How often did you work with the nerds, like all the programmers and all the stats folks?
Pretty consistently. We had conversations all the time. If I ever had questions, I would reach out to them.
What was a common question you asked? like, or a general common question? Is it like, hey, make this tool for me? Hey, fix this software for me? Hey,
It
look into
was
this analysis.
they were always building tools and sharing stuff with us, and
Yeah.
they'd come up with new ideas. And it was more of just an open conversation about what they're seeing on their end, obviously not knowing the player and working with them, and then us pairing that with what we've already tried, why we think that will or won't work, those
Yeah.
things. I would say with the Twins, it's an unbelievable relationship
So you
between
guys
the
were
players and the front
basically in
office.
sync.
Oh, there was no silos like
Well, that's
between.
why the Twins have been so good for the past few years. It's
Yes,
just like,
you look at it with the front office, the PD department, the
yeah,
analytics team, the strength and conditioning team, the trainers, all of those groups. Like we literally were doing stuff
yeah,
together all the time. Like especially with like some of the players, we would literally once a month have a meeting with like one person represented at least from every group where we would have a conversation about one specific player. Like it was very very good. So coming back though to what organizations are doing, I would say for the most part, there's someone at every single organization, at least one person that is up to date. They know everything that's going on. The difference from one org to the next is how many of the coaches are bought in, I would say. So the coaches that are actually on the field every single day, even some of the coordinators in some organizations probably. But I would say it's the implementation that the coaches are able to do, because the coaches are the ones that are with the players day in and day out. A coordinator might come to town, the pitching coordinator, the hitting coordinator, whoever it might be, they'll come to town for 3 days. They'll tell you, hey, we need to be doing X, Y, and Z. But when they leave, there's no saying what you're doing. Right now, you're probably being evaluated. If you're in a good organization, they're evaluating how good you're doing, how much better you're making the players. But at the end of the day, you can kind of make your own decisions, right? Like the
yeah,
coaches are the ones that are with them day in and day out. And if the second a coordinator leaves, the coach is bad mouthing the coordinator what he said and basically saying, no, we're not doing that. There's going to be an issue with the players in that relationship. So I would say that's the separator. The really good organizations from top to bottom, they're in sync. They might not agree on everything, but they are pushing the needle for development to get guys as good as they possibly can. And the systems in place that the coordinators and the front office put in place are just unbelievable, to where now it's a clear plan of what the organization believes. And now the coaches just have to execute it. And the good orgs are having training sessions where they're teaching this stuff. Like with the Twins, that we would have classroom sessions during spring training with coaches, all of us coaches,
you
where
in a
we're
classroom over there.
doing presentations, going over steam shifted wake, how we can optimize every player's pitch. We would have
Yeah.
one-on-one meetings with every single player. We'd go over all of this information where us coaches were being educated constantly, and we were being held accountable for
Mm,
actually implementing those things and helping players, right? Like it wasn't just, hey, here's an idea of, if you want to try it, go for it. It's like, no, like this is what we believe as an organization. We're expecting you to implement this. If it doesn't work, we'll obviously adjust, and you have freedom within that to use different strategies to achieve it. It's not like you're a puppet, but there's core principles that you're following and that you're trying
yeah.
to push forward. And in my conversations with coaches that are with other orgs, or players that I've now coached and trained in the private sector and all those things, that is one of the biggest missing links is the coordinators, the coaches, all of them, they're not on the same page. The coach wants to do one thing, the coordinator wants another thing. There isn't consistency with what's being preached. So as a result, that's why players go outside the organization. That's why they go to Driveline. That's why they go to Tread Athletics. That's why they go to all these other places, is because they're not getting what they need within their organization, or at least what they think they need.
Mm,
So I don't want to say that for every organization. Like I'm sure there's still players, they still want to do their own thing regardless, but at the end of the day, players are going to find a way to get better. It's their careers. They're going to take ownership of it. The ones that want to actually be as good as they can, and they're going to go to whatever resource they have to, even if that means it's outside of the organization.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It's always an ambiguous perception for fans because we just see stats on web pages, and we hear
Mm-hmm.
post game press conferences, but in reality we don't know what's going on behind the
Right.
scenes. We can't make informed opinions whatsoever, and if you do have an informed opinion, well, you're kind of an idiot because you don't know what's going on. And like just hearing about the classroom stuff and the alignment between the stats guys, the coaches, the coordinators, it's a massive operation.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's what you have to do. Like I know people talk about it all the time, and you can say I don't know if cliche is the word, but just the culture matters. Like you
Yeah,
can, the top dog can have all the knowledge in the world, but if he can't get the people underneath him to implement it, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
Like there has to be buy-in, and how you get buy-in is by creating that culture and that environment where trust is built and people want to get better and want to go in one direction.
I hear you. All right, Javier Assad,
All
before we
right.
sign off here.
Rant's over. Let's go to
Well, that was good.
Okay, now
Can I start with Assad? Can I introduce
please
Assad?
do, because my intro wasn't going to be very nice. So yeah, go for
Okay.
it.
Well, easy now over there. Okay. That's not a good preface. Here's what I'll say about Assad. He doesn't make sense. The 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 profile with Assad is one that you can't match other pitchers to.
Correct.
I may be obsessed with uniqueness, and I use uniqueness as a way to, formulate these arguments that even though stuff doesn't look good on paper, it's because they're unique. So let me show one screen over here, and then I'll throw it back to you. But if you look at Assad's slider, which I gotta find over here, his slider is an outlier pitch. So let me show this. And there we go. So again, this is like the pitch gene profile or pitch DNA. So you see that big red dot on the very top?
Yep.
So this is all Statcast numbers. He's completely away from the norm, the center focal point of most pitchers. He's not like other pitchers. His slider looks different in many different aspects. So when we look at Stuff Plus and Pitching Bot and all the different run prevention models to date, they're great tools. They have pushed things forward. They've found different traits you can bring about pitchers. But the way that these models are trained is biased towards volume of data, volume of entry points. So if you have entry points to these models that don't include guys like Assad, well, then the model is going to bias against those pitchers who have more similarities among everyone. With Assad, his stuff is going to grade as a 40 out of 80 on the scale, which is one standard deviation below league average. His slider is going to grade as bad by all intents and purposes. But the way those models are working is they're assuming Assad looks like a normal pitcher, but he doesn't. So there's some error in selecting guys purely based on those run prevention models, and then also error in projecting those guys going forward. That's why when we look at the periphery or the market inefficiencies, the way I interpret that are just outliers, trying to find those unique traits, and then you really capitalize off those traits and try to make it work. And that's why I think, to your point, you have FIP, walk rate, all this stuff. I agree with you, but it's been such a larger sample now that I don't know what to think about Assad and his lack of alignment between his ERA, his FIP, and his stuff.
Well, first of all, are you talking about his slider or his sweeper? Because it looks like he has both from what I see.
That was his slider right there.
So just the small, 7 inches of horizontal, maybe? I'd have to look at it again.
Yeah, somewhere over there. I can pull up his sweeper too. Let me see what his sweeper is.
His sweeper looks good.
Yeah, so if you look at his sweeper, it's also, well, in this case, most of his breaking pitches are being classified as a slider, right? So
maybe that's the discrepancy, because there's not very many sliders on the
yeah,
plot.
but it's not the difference is not being carried by horizontal. So it's the shape from a release point perspective and angles and horizontal. It's all different.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even fit the normal sweeper mold. It's still a unique trait, even if it were classified as a sweeper.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point that sometimes players just don't fit into the general buckets, right? Like, for the most part, most players, you're going to be able to figure out if their stuff's good, if they're going to perform well based off of some of these models, but there's always going to be outliers. But what I think we have to be careful with, especially from a player development standpoint, is like people sometimes will look at guys like this, be like, see, like FIP doesn't matter. All this stuff doesn't matter. You don't have to strike out a lot of guys. He has above average walks. Like, you can still be successful if he can pitches. He knows how to pitch. He has all these different pitch types. So yes, it works for him. I have no doubts that because of the track record he's had with this, that it will continue to work. Everything inside me tells me it won't, but it obviously will. But I think we always have to be careful with not looking at outliers and thinking that everyone can be an outlier and that everyone is that. But also recognizing, though, when there is an outlier. Like I would probably, like, just looking at his numbers, if I just saw his strikeouts, his walks, the damage, all that, I would say, yeah, this guy's not a very good pitcher. Because
Do you have his numbers in front of you right now?
Yeah.
What's his ERA?
3.8. 3.19.
Makes no sense. And that's just this year, right?
Yeah, he strikes. Yeah, 3.19 with
What was it last year?
with a 4.55 FIP. He's striking out 19.7%.
Yeah.
Big league average is 23%. And here's the thing. If he wasn't walking guys, I'd be like, okay, like, yeah, this can work. There's always outliers for this, but he's walking more than the average
I know.
pitcher. He's
Well,
walking 10 to
what
10%.
was his ERA last year? Do you have it in front of you? No.
Yep, I can. Let me see. Was it good?
Yeah, it was. I'm just being rhetorical over here.
Well, I'm going to look at the last few years. Let's look.
And I'm not. Well, he came up and pitched most of the time last season, so he's a 2-year guy.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm not arguing the case for Assad. I'm arguing the case for confident projections. That's what I'm arguing for.
No, this is incredible. He had a 3.05 last year, 3.11.
And so this is in, I want to say in total, because he had 109, about 110 innings last year. Things over 100 this year. This is over like 200 innings where he's had this.
Here's his career. Career is 254 innings.
Yeah.
With a 3.11 ERA and a 4.43 FIP.
So at some point, the 250 innings becomes not a small sample size. And it does beg the question how this happened. So when I see the outliers, I'm not saying, oh, he's an outlier, pick him up. I'm saying he's an outlier with success. Yep. So what is going on? How can we learn from Assad's profile if he's not fitting the mold, yet still having big time success?
I'll share my screen so I can show everyone his pitch block, because he throws about 8 pitches according to this. So he's got a 4-seam fastball, a sinker, a changeup, a cutter, a sweeper, a slider, according to this, and then a curveball. Yeah. So he's throwing everything but the kitchen sink. So like, yeah, he keeps you guessing. Like, and you can see for the most part, like he throws a decent. It doesn't look like he throws very many changeups. Is that right?
Basically, yeah.
It looks like a lot of, but between
there was a lot of sinkers though.
Yeah, 4-seam sinkers, cutters, sweepers, and curveballs. Like, there's a pretty good sample with all of those. So, like, even those alone, 5 pitches right there. Like, he's mixing it up a lot. But where I still get confused is that should lead to weaker contact. And we looked at his barrel rate. His barrel rate is average. It's not like it's below average to where he's given up, a lot of contact, but it's weak. It's about average. So it's just I'm honestly lost. I don't know what is leading to the success.
Listen, you're gonna have to figure it out on your own time. I think anecdotally watching him pitch, there's stretches where all of a sudden everything's weak contact, and then there's stretches where all of a sudden barrels are through the roof. And
so it makes it seem average, but it's really not.
I think there's just a ton of variability there. And a lot of times he gets hit hard, second time through, back into the lineup, third time through, 5th inning, 6th inning, and he hasn't been able to go deep into games with regularity, although he has done it. So I think for him, it's more of this weird hyper variability, and he may just be best served as like a 3, 4, 5 inning guy and a swing starter long term if he can't make it, through the order 2, 3 times. But it's one of those weird case studies where you can learn information, and that's kind of the why I posed the player to you, because I'm like, hey, he's not making sense. Like, everything on paper suggests this guy is like below average, but he's been one of the best. It's very odd.
Yeah, I want to do more research on him, because there has to be something. Like, I have to be able to figure it out, and maybe I won't be able to, but there's something there that you're right, we can learn from. And you know what? I mean, maybe 2 years from now it levels off and he's getting crushed, but hey, ride the wave while you can. I mean, don't ask questions.
But still, let's say 2 years goes from now, he does get crushed. Still, you have 250 innings of success. So there's some randomness involved, granted, but it's still a large sample, and something in that span was leading to success that isn't fitting typical molds. So you can still learn from that, even if he starts getting crushed going forward.
That's true. Well, this was good, Brendan. I think we could talk for a couple more hours if we went down the whole roster.
We have 2 more hours to go.
No, we're not doing a Joe Rogan podcast or for your taste, Lex Friedman. Well, he goes on for what, 4 or 5 hours?
You want to do an 8-hour podcast? I could do an 8-hour podcast.
Yeah. Maybe one of these days we'll do a little marathon session going through every Cubs pitcher.
I want to do a session of you pitching to me and me hitting off you. Actually, I don't know if I want to do that.
Well, we'll make that a YouTube one.
I'll just strike out every single time.
Well, let's do this. Here's a little deal. If we make, or if the Cubs make the playoffs, we'll do a little special edition episode right before the first playoff game. Give a little preview, talk about the Justin Steele, maybe talk about some of the changes he's made between now and then.
Well, you're just saying that because they're not going to make playoffs.
Well, regardless, we'll do it again at some point. But
yeah,
well, I see you got your name here, Brendan_Cubs, that you can find Brendan on Twitter. Are you just on Twitter or are you on anything else?
No, just on Twitter. Yeah.
Okay. So if you want daily rants and tweets about the Chicago Cubs.
I'll be nicer than that. Daily
no, it's
rants
good.
It's a little extreme.
Well, right now there's rants. You guys aren't playing well.
That's true.
More depressed tweets.
More depressed tweets for sure.
A lot of visuals though. Like Brendan does a lot of the pitching side of things. He does other stuff, but he does post a ton about pitching. So a lot of really cool visuals for you to see. So definitely would highly recommend checking them out there. You have your podcast. What's the name of the podcast again?
Corey Freeman and I do a podcast.
Yeah.
It's called CHGO Cubs. We've been doing a podcast before that for about 10 years. And quite frankly, it's a hobby of ours. It's quite a big network, but Corey and I are very lucky where they let us continue our fun project on the side of our normal lives. And we're fortunate that we get support to do that.
Yeah. So check that out. I listen to them every week. You guys do shows on Sundays, right?
Sunday shows.
Yep. So tune into that. But Brendan, this was great.
Yeah. Anytime, Jared. Anytime.
All right.
You make me sound good and smart. I appreciate it.
Well, you are. All right. That's the pod.